Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're doing a build that I've been sat on for a while. A build inspired by one of my favourite games of all time, Bloodborne. Now, I'm not sure how many people who watch this channel will have played Bloodborne. For Souls games, while they are action RPGs, they're a bit removed from tabletop and Baldur's Gate, and Bloodborne is especially tricky to get your hands on nowadays because it's basically a PlayStation exclusive. So I'm not sure exactly how many people who have played it are kind of watching this video, but if you have, you're going to love this build. I knew I wanted to do a Bloodborne build from months and months ago, but I could never quite get it right, getting the look down, getting the kind of general feel of like a Bloodborne hunter. It was really, really hard to do, and I couldn't quite make it work the way I kind of hoped to. I ended up casually bringing up the build idea on stream a couple of weeks ago during the Deity build stream, and I posted the old kind of build that I had somewhat worked out as like an option for if people wanted to still try it out, but I never made it into an official video. Until I decided to go back and take a second look at it. Because then I kind of realised that I went about it all wrong. Once I tweaked the build a little bit, I not only made a Bloodborne character, but instead I shifted from making basically the kind of Bloodborne hunter, the player character, into straight up making a Bloodborne boss. Specifically one of my favourite characters in all of gaming, and one of my favourite boss fights too, Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower from the Bloodborne DLC Old Hunters. I was able to kind of sort of get something that was reminiscent of her playstyle, while also being able to make a character that literally has multiple phases of combat like a From Software boss fight. So when you're playing this character, you literally start off in your phase 1, then as your HP gets lower you switch to phase 2, and then when your HP gets really low you switch to phase 3, becoming stronger and more tanky as the fight goes on, with being able to deal more damage as well, and be able to inflict more status effects, because of course I've gone for a bleed build here, so you're getting bleed and fire, hence the name Bloodflame Duelist. Trust me, this is gonna be a good one. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, I will kind of just start this off right off the bat. I mean, you would have looked at the description already, you already know what this build's going to be. This is going to be a fighter barbarian multiclass. Barbarian, you can choose to start off as a fighter or a barbarian, but you do want to take at least a 1-level dip of fighter somewhere to be able to get our fighting style. So I would say probably the leveling scheme you want to follow that's probably going to feel the nicest is to maybe start as either a barbarian or fighter, get 4 or 5 levels of barbarian, and kind of by level 6, kind of have a fighter 1, barbarian 6, not barbarian 5. I think that'll be pretty good. You'll kind of get the theme of the build then, and then the rest of the fighter levels that will come after that will just be kind of adding fuel to the fire, so to speak. So, but I am going to be kind of starting off as fighter here because that's what I did in my testing, and I'll kind of show the leveling scheme that I would personally recommend for this build, but you do have quite a bit of freedom here to do what you like. So without further ado, let's get into it. Like I said, I'm going to be starting off as a fighter, giving us access to all weapons and all armor as proficiencies, which is great. We're also going to get access to Second Wind, which is going to feel pretty good for this build, kind of in the early game especially, because it's going to give you a D10 of healing, which is nice. We're also going to be able to pick up our fighting style, and rather than going dueling, we are going to go with 2-weapon fighting. This does end up being a dual wielder build, so we want to be able to make our full damage attacks with our offhand weapons, so 2-weapon fighting is definitely the kind of style of choice here, as well as the fact that since now we can attack with our bonus action, which we aren't really using for much else with this build, you kind of get extra attack pretty damn early just by dual wielding with this style, so you're going to feel pretty powerful right off the bat. As well as we want to make sure our ability scores are in the right place. This is a dexterity based build because again, Bloodborne hunters and even the bosses are quite fast and fluid and mobile, so I really wanted to capture that here. So we're going to dump strength because we don't need it, but if you really wanted strength you could bump it up with the potions of hill giant strength. Dexterity is at 16 and is going to be our main attacking stat. Constitution is also going to be one of our primary stats here because we want to have a decent pool of HP, because again, if our HP is, if our build is going to kind of get stronger with the lower HP that we get, we want at least a decent starting pool of HP. 16 Constitution is perfectly fine for the whole build, that's what I used in my testing, but if you wanted to sacrifice maybe like a couple of points in Dexterity to put into Constitution, or if you wanted to optimize this a bit further using Ethel's Boon and the Mirror of Loss, you could make this even more powerful than I had it in this video. But the build is still extremely strong anyway, so you're not going to have to worry about that. So yeah, Dex and Con at 16. Intelligence is at 8, we don't really need it. Wisdom is at 14, and there's going to be a reason for this that I'll get into later. And Charisma is at 12, just so we have a little bit of Charisma so we can still be the party face if we need to. Now, this is going to be a Dark Urge build, because while it's not required, Dark Urge is going to give me something that I really want for this build. You could probably already guess what it is, but I won't spoil it here just in case people want to click off the video before I get into Dark Urge spoilers, which I will spoiler warn when it comes up. But we do get to pick our skill proficiencies here, and I'm going to go with Acrobatics. I said I'm going to go with Acrobatics, thank you. By going with Acrobatics, we're going to be able to resist being shoved, which is always nice, and it just kind of feels right again for a Bloodborne Hunter type character, as well as we're going to be able to get Medicine and Intimidation from our from our Haunted One background, my apologies. Medicine actually makes a ton of sense for a Bloodborne character, because in Bloodborne, there's this whole thing called the, like, blood healing with the old blood transfusions. Basically, Bloodborne's world comes from the fact that they discovered this old ancient blood that had healing properties and started just giving it to everyone left, right, and center, but then the people that had that blood started turning into horrible monsters over time, and that's why you're a Bloodborne, that's why you're like a hunter in Bloodborne, you're hunting down these people-turned beasts. So medicine actually does make a lot of sense, especially for Lady Maria herself as well, because she, in the game, was kind of a doctor of sorts. She kind of was doing medical experiments on people, so actually medicine makes a perfect amount of sense here. I've gone with perception just because it's a decent skill to have. Intimidation comes from the Haunted One background as well, and we've also got persuasion from our human skill, because of course I've made a human here. So there you go. Let's move on. Right, so next up I'm going to immediately take a dip into our other class, Barbarian, because again, I think you'll get a lot of the themes of the build a lot earlier on if you start off in Barbarian a bit sooner, so we're going to go for that for now. Barbarian is going to give us Rage, allowing us to deal an additional 2 damage with melee and improvised weapons and throwing, as well as making us also have unarmored defense if you wanted to wear clothing. Basically, Rage is going to be our phase 2. Once our health gets a little bit low, we're going to start raging, getting a bit more damage and physical resistances. We'll have resistances to physical damage, so bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, as well as advantage on strength checks and saves. So even though we have lower strength, we're still going to be able to make those strength checks and saves a bit easier while we're in phase 2. So yeah, like I say, you become a bit more tanky and you're able to deal more damage once you hit phase 2. So let's keep going. Next up at Barbarian level 2, we're going to get Danger Sense, meaning that we have advantage on dex saves against trap spells and surfaces. That's always nice. As well as we're also going to get Reckless Attack, which is going to be essential for the build. This build has a mechanic that relies heavily on being able to have advantage, and as such, being able to basically always have advantage thanks to Reckless Attack is seriously good, so we're going to want to have that in our arsenal. Next up, at Barbarian level 3, we're going to be able to pick up our subclass, and of course you already saw it coming. If we're making a bleed build, we're going Wildheart. Wildheart is going to give us Speak with Animals, which is always nice to have, as well as a Bestial Heart, and we are picking the Tiger. Tiger is going to allow us to, while raging, be able to use a skill called Tiger's Bloodlust, allowing us to lash out at up to 3 enemies and make them bleed. There is no saving throw here. If they are hit by this attack, they are bleeding. It uses our half of our normal weapon damage, so our attacks will be slightly weaker, but bleed is going to make it worth it. Bleed is going to allow us to basically deal 2 slashing damage to opponents over each of their turns, and they have disadvantage on con saves. It is removed by healing, but we'll be able to get some additional benefits from bleeding people a bit later on. And obviously, Rage is just good anyway. Next up at Barbarian level 4, we are going to get to choose our first feat. Now, I am personally thinking you're going to want to pick up Dual Wielder pretty early. You can start off the game using light weapons like a short sword and a dagger, for example, if you wanted to kind of dual wield early, but without needing this feat, and you absolutely can do that if you maybe want to focus on bumping up your dexterity first, but I could see picking up Dual Wielder early because we are going to actually be getting our main weapon for this build in Act 1. So unless you don't care about dual wielding from the early game, maybe bump up that dexterity first, but dual wielding is going to feel pretty good still anyway, so I'd recommend picking this up here. With Dual Wielder, we're going to be able to use two-weapon fighting, even if our weapons don't have the light property, and one of our weapons doesn't, a rapier, so we're going to need this. But getting a +1 bonus to our armor class while dual wielding is nice, so we are going to enjoy having that. Next up, at Barbarian level 5, we're going to get access to fast movement, allowing us to move quick, which is great because, you know, we're a hunter from Bloodborne, the whole thing is moving very, very bloody quickly, as well as extra attacks, and now we are a full martial fighter. Again, one level slightly later than usual, but again, if you've been dual wielding up to this point, you basically now have 3 attacks instead of 2, which is great. Now, you have a choice here. You can either go to level 6 of Barbarian, which I did for my testing, and is kind of what I prefer because it's more on theme with the build, which was going to allow you to get an animal aspect. Now, we can either pick Aspect of the Tiger, which allows us to use our additional, basically add an additional strength modifier to attack rolls against bleeding enemies. Obviously, we're not using strength, so that's completely pointless, but we can also pick up Wolverine. Wolverine is going to allow us to, whenever we attack a bleeding or poisoned target, so for us bleeding, we can maim it. Maiming a target inflicts them with the maimed condition, and their movement speed is reduced to 0, meaning they cannot escape, as well as they have disadvantage on dexterity saves. This is pretty cool. It gives us another unique thing that makes bleeding our enemies a bit more worth it, other than just the thematic and the little bit of damage kind of buff that you get out of it. So I actually think this is a pretty cool thing to pick up if you want to be on theme for the build. However, it might be more powerful overall to go to level 7 of Fighter here, and I'll explain why later. So if you want to build this build exactly as I have done it here, go to level 6 and pick up the Aspect of the Beast Wolverine. Otherwise, you can go to level 7 of Fighter instead. It doesn't really matter. It's kind of like a pick your favorite kind of situation here, where you can kind of either go for the more bleed build kind of aspect of it, or the more kind of full combat focus aspect of it, which I'll get into in a minute. But for now, we are going to take level 6 of Barbarian here. Now, we're going to be moving on to Fighter for the rest of our levels. Level 2 of Fighter is going to give us Action Surge, immediately giving us an extra action to use that turn. This is going to be kind of our like big boss attack flurry rush that we do at least maybe once or twice per day, or for us at least once per combat. This is going to just allow us to basically have a massive Nova round of damage, especially against bleeding targets. Next up, at Fighter level 3, we do get to pick our subclass, and of course, I'm going to go with Battle Master. Battle Master is going to allow us to get maneuvers, and the reason I want this is because Bloodborne Hunters and Lady Maria, the boss fight specifically, have a ton of attacks. Maria is a quick and fast duelist type character who is able to use, you know, her weapon to be able to attack and strike quickly, and also uses many different moves to trip up her opponents, as well as Bloodborne Hunters themselves do as well. So we want to be able to get many different ways to use our kind of main weapon here. So we're going to be able to pick up some maneuvers here, which are going to allow us to do even more damage on our attacks, as well as inflict certain effects. I quite like picking up Riposte, being able to use our reaction to basically kind of, after dodging, retaliate with an immediate 1d8 of damage. That feels very duelisty, so I'm going to definitely go for that. Trip Attack is another amazing feature here. Trip Attack is going to allow us to deal an additional 1d8 of damage, and also knock the target prone. Prone obviously meaning that we can gain us and our party members can pretty much gain advantage on all attacks against them as long as they're within 3 meters, and it makes it so enemies have a harder time escaping between being knocked prone and being potentially maimed. In fact, actually, hang on a minute, this is an interaction that I forgot to test, so let me know if this is how this works. If a creature is maimed, their movement speed is reduced to 0. Can they get up from being prone because they have to spend their movement speed? Ooh, let me know if that works. I personally don't have time to test this myself before the build goes up, so let me know if that works. Someone test that and get back to me. Anyways, We have Trip Attack and Riposte, those are my personal choices, and the third one can be whatever you like. We've got Disarming Strike, which means you can deal an additional bit of damage and possibly force the target to drop their weapon. Distracting Strike would give all of your allies advantage on their next attack roll against the target. Just use Trip Attack. Evasive Footwork could be great if you want to kind of impose disadvantage on melee attacks against you. Feinting Attack if you want just guaranteed advantage with an additional d8, but we already have Reckless Attack, so I wouldn't say that's great. I would definitely say probably my personal choice, and the one that I used in testing, is Menacing Attack, because if you've ever gone up against a FromSoft boss, you know how terrifying they can be. Basically, we can now frighten our targets, meaning they cannot move, have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls. So, yeah, basically it's just a way to inflict another status effect on top of the other status effects that we're going to be inflicting. So, it's my personal pick. Next up, at Fighter Level 4, we are going to get another feat. Let's start bumping up those ability scores, bumping up our dexterity to an 18. Next up, at Level 5, we are going to get extra attack again, but unfortunately we can't really make use of it. And finally, at Fighter Level 6, we are going to get another feat, which we can either use, which we want to use for an ability score improvement, either bumping up our Dexterity to 20 or our Constitution to 18. It's entirely your choice. I found that the Dexterity 20 tended to work a bit better in my testing, so that's what I'm going to go with here. But as I said earlier, if you were to go to Level 7 of Fighter, you would actually get more Battlemaster maneuvers and another superiority die to fuel them. So if you wanted to focus more on getting those battlefield maneuvers, you could absolutely go for level 6 of Battlemaster if you don't care so much about getting the named condition, but I wanted it, so that's how we're doing it. Go away, Gale. And that is the build. Let's not spoil the equipment just yet. What you're going to be getting out of this is a very tanky character. We have a decently large pool of HP, plus our Barbarian Rage, once we get into our Phase 2, as I said, is going to allow us to tank a ton of hits, as well as the fact that we're going to be able to attack brutally using our battlefield maneuvers, be able to inflict bleed with Tiger's Bloodlust. You can kind of be the face of the party as well with a little bit of charisma that we have, and speak with animals as well. But, as with most of my builds, the main crux of this is in the equipment. Because while we basically have the basic kind of fighting style that we're going to be going for here, as well as some of the core themes, we don't have what's really going to make this build shine yet. So, let's get into the equipment. So, the weapon that the reason I decided to kind of go with a rapier for this build is this is kind of going to be based on Lady Maria's weapon from the game, the Rakuyo. Now, the Rakuyo is one of Bloodborne's trick weapons. In Bloodborne, pretty much all of the weapons you can get in the game have an alternate form. If you press the L1 button, they will transform from one form into the other. Now, the Rakuyo from Bloodborne is kind of like a pole blade slash katana type thing, but the blade isn't quite a katana. It bends a little bit at the top, but it's definitely used more for thrusting attacks as much as it's used for slashing, so I decided to go for a rapier here instead because it's going to fit nicely into our playstyle. But the thing is with the Rakuyo is it's kind of a double-ended sword. You'll have the big rapier end and then a little kind of short sword end on one side, and you can wield it like a pole blade, or like a twin blade. But then if you press the trick attack button, it turns into two weapons, the rapier and the short sword coming apart to be two separate weapons. So that's what I've gone for today, which is why this is kind of a dual-wielding build. Starting off, we have the Rupturing Blade. Now, the Rupturing Blade you can pick up right away in Act 1 for just completing a quest, which is really, really nice, as this is quite a solid weapon with a unique ability. Now, I have used a twin-cast sorcerer, that being Gale here, to buff both of our weapons here with the Drakethroat Glaive's fire buff, because it gives us extra fire damage as well as brings up what would normally be two +1 weapons up to +2, so it's a bit better for the late game. So you are going to want to have a twin casting sorcerer in the party with the Drakethroat Glaive to get the most amount of damage out of this build as possible using these weapons. But the reason I want to use the Rupturing Blade is because it comes with a unique ability called Searing Blood. Basically, Searing Blood allows you to deal a massive amount of additional piercing damage and an additional bit of fire damage, while you yourself take a bit of slashing damage, so you're getting closer to that phase 2. So in Bloodborne, Lady Maria's boss fight actually has, I believe it's 3 phases, and in the third phase, she kind of... Well, in the second phase, she stabs herself and gets blood all over her weapon, allowing her to use blood attacks. And then in phase... So that kind of fits here with this skill. But in phase 3, she gains fire attacks. So now that we have fire and bleed... Yeah, this is Lady Maria. Pretty much straight up, aside from the hat. Wish we could get the hat. But yeah, we actually have a pretty powerful attack here that fits perfectly with the build, dealing fire, bleed, all of that good stuff. Unfortunately, rapiers by default can't do bleed necessarily, but they can do gaping wounds with piercing strike, which is kind of the same deal, but it's not exactly called bleeding. So we do have another way of kind of being able to do something similar with our main hand weapon. So yeah, the Rupturing Blade, obtainable right in Act 1, is going to be our main weapon throughout the whole game. And we're going to pair it with the Slicing Short Sword. When the wielder attacks with advantage, which thanks to Reckless Attack we can do all the time, the attack inflicts bleeding. So now we can just inflict bleeding with pretty much everything that we do. So we're pretty much always guaranteed to get bleed off now if we use Reckless Attack. So yeah, I think overall these two weapons work together pretty solidly. They can be obtained rather early in the game, so you're going to have this playstyle come online really soon, especially if you take those early levels in Barbarian, which are going to allow you to use the Tiger's Bloodlust as kind of an extra attack to make enemies bleed as well. You may think, man, this is overkill on the whole bleed thing, and you'd be right. So technically, once you get all the equipment in place, really you don't need Tiger's Bloodlust, so you could probably swap your Bestial Heart to maybe something like the Bear Totem if you want that kind of the resistances or something like that. But I kind of wanted to see just how much I could get out of just bleeding with pretty much every attack that I do, and like I say, it's still pretty strong, but again, might be a bit overkill, so feel free to change that up if you like. But otherwise, let's get into the rest of the equipment here, and let's talk about how we're going to be able to get into our Phase 2 in a bit more detail with the Helmet of Grit. When the wearer has 50% hit points or less remaining, they have an additional bonus action. So we hit less than 50% HP, then we see that we now have two bonus actions, basically similar to Thief Rogue, and then we use one of those bonus actions to Rage, meaning that now we have tankiness, extra damage, bleeding sweep attack, and two bonus actions to be able to dual wield effectively, which feels great, I must say. I just realized I forgot to put this on the build, but it'll be in the description. There is supposed to be dual crossbows here as well, the Hellfire Hand crossbow and the Near Misser, so be sure to put those on this build as well, but I kind of forgot to put them on, and I didn't really need to use them in my testing, so there you go. I just realized they're not supposed to be there, but they'll be in the description. So yeah, the Helmet of Grit is going to be kind of a fun thing for this build. Unfortunately, it's only obtainable in Act 3. You can get it right away in Act 3, but you do have to wait till Act 3 to get it. So another thematic helmet you can use in the early game will be the Cap of Wrath. During combat, when the wearer starts their turn with 50% hit points or less, they gain Wrath for 2 turns. The Wrath gives you a +1 bonus to damage with melee weapons for every turn of this condition remaining. This can stack up to, I believe, up to +7, meaning that if you have a way of stacking Wrath, which I'll get to in a minute, you can get an upwards of +7 to your damage with melee weapons, which is insane. Obviously, we'll only be able to get a temporary kind of +2 to our Wrath, because it does go down by 1 each turn, but it does feel at least thematic enough to feel like you're getting sort of a semi-phase 2 in the early game before you get your true phase 2 in when you get the Helmet of Grit in Act 3. Next up, we have the Cloak of Displacement. This is just an overall powerful cloak, which is going to mean that at the start of each turn, you basically get the blur effect, meaning that enemies have disadvantage on attack rolls against you. Well, this will make it a bit trickier to get to that 50% of HP range that we want. When we do get there, it is going to make us a bit more tanky, just making it so attacks hit us less, so we're going to be able to keep up our defenses a bit longer. Next up, the Ballless Armor, because this is a Dark Urge build, and the reason I'm kind of thinking this will be an evil Dark Urge, and I'll get into some more stuff about that in a minute, is because in Bloodborne, a lot of the characters, especially the boss characters, well, they start out with good intentions, usually as hunters, like the player character. Eventually, they consume so much of the old blood that it slowly drives them mad, and eventually turns them into beasts. So I feel like if we're looking at the Dark Urge as basically being the corruption of the old blood driving this person to madness, and driving them to kill anything in sight, then yeah, becoming a Ballist in Baldur's Gate 3 makes perfect sense. This is going to allow us to get Aura of Murder, meaning that every creature within 2 meters becomes vulnerable to piercing damage, meaning that they're going to be taking double damage from all of our piercing attacks, which is pretty great. However, this only works if they are not resistant or immune to it, and we'll have a way of getting around that in just a second. We also gain a +2 bonus to initiative rolls, which means we're going to be super fast, which also makes sense. But let me quickly get into something else here that comes from being a Dark Urge. Spoilers in 3, 2, 1. We have a phase 3 where we turn into a monster, just like the boss fights of Bloodborne. We have the Slayer. Now, basically what this is going to mean is when we hit that last little thread of HP, we suddenly transform into our monster form in our 3rd phase and get all of our HP back, 153 to be precise, meaning that we are now even more tanky. And now as well, while we can't like talk or cast spells, well, we're not casting spells anyway, some of our benefits that we're going to have from this build are actually going to pass over into the Slayer form, which is kind of nice. I'll get more into what the Slayer form does for us in a minute once we kind of get past the equipment phase, but I just wanted you to know that by going the kind of evil Dark Urge route, by being consumed by the blood madness type thing, we're going to get a 3rd phase that's actually a monstrous transformation. It's so cool. Anyways, moving on, because now we can talk about an early game alternative for the Ballist armor, and it's the Padded Armor +2. Just a solid piece of light armor that also feels kind of Bloodborne-y. I've colored all of it in Furnace Black and Red, by the way. That's the dye I've used for all this armor. So overall, you're going to feel pretty strong, pretty fashionable having this on, but you're going to want to switch to the Ballist armor in Act 3. Next up, we have the Bone Spike Gloves, meaning our attacks ignore resistance to slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning damage. So now, even if something is resistant to our piercing attacks, we're just going to be able to ignore it anyway. Unfortunately, I don't believe this synchronizes with this feature. I don't think, it doesn't make it so our enemies aren't resistant to piercing damage anymore. They're still resistant, our attacks just ignore that resistance. So unfortunately, the Aura of Murder does not synergize with the Bone Spike Gloves quite as well as I would like, but being able to get over resistances is better than just not being able to at all, especially when I'm testing my combat against Steel Watchers. So yeah, but if you want an early game alternative to this, it would be quite on theme. The Thermo Arcanic Gloves are a pretty good option. They would allow you to, whenever you deal fire damage, which should be pretty much all the time if you get the Drakeford Glaive, allow you to build up heat and eventually do a big fire attack, like a big boss attack, basically. You could also use the Helldusk Gloves, I guess, for just a flat d6 of fire damage to all of your attacks, but in my testing, I did find that the Bone Spike Gloves just are better. They're more consistent for being able to get more consistent damage on multiple different encounters, so in my opinion, the Bone Spike Gloves slightly beat out the Helldusk Gloves, but it's entirely up to you. And then finally, for the boots, you have a few options here. You could either just go for the Evasive Shoes, which is what I originally have for this build, for just a +1 bonus to Acrobatics and Armor Class. Very fitting for the build, gives us a total of 21 AC, which is really nice. However, there are 2 other boot options you could go with. If you really want to play into the very swift hunter aspect of this kind of build, go for the Boots of Speed to use one of your potentially 2 bonus actions to click your heels and dash with double movement, as well as you'll be able to invoke disadvantage on opportunity attacks against you, allowing you to maneuver around the battlefield and be really hard to hit. But if you're really into the dual wielding side of things, you can kind of get this and a little bit more with the Line Breaker Boots. Once per turn, when you dash, you gain Wrath for 2 turns. Now this is currently bugged. This doesn't have a once per turn limitation, as well as the fact that you get 3 turns of Wrath instead of 2. Basically you get 3 stacks instead of 2, so it's a bit more powerful than it currently should be, but I think in September that is going to get patched. But with this build, it doesn't really matter, because with this build, since you're dual wielding and able to attack with your bonus action as it is, I'll just quickly colour these boots with the dye because I forgot to. There you go, it looks a bit better. You can dash with your main action, which you can just do anyway, and then still gain up to 2 attacks with your offhand anyway. And for each dash that you'll do, you'll gain 2 to 3 turns of Wrath. 2 if it's fixed by the time you watch this video, 3 as it is currently, meaning that with just a couple of dashes, you can get basically +6 to your melee damage, which is insane. Again, now you're a boss that slowly grows more powerful the longer the fight goes on, So as long as you're able to keep dashing just periodically, maybe every couple of turns, you can keep up a pretty decent damage boost to all of your attacks. Now, I didn't use this in the combat footage you're going to see, I just kind of used the most basic strategy, just having the evasive shoes, but if you really wanted to kick up the power a notch and have another kind of fun-feeling, powerful mechanic, then the Line Breaker boots are for you. But we'll switch back to the evasive shoes for now. Next up, the Amulet of Ball. I mean, we're the Ball spawn, we're at the Ball list. I mean, yeah, might as well have the Amulet of Ball. This is going to allow us to automatically inflict bleeding against targets that have their maximum hit points when we attack them. Again, we have a lot of ways of inflicting bleed, so this is probably overkill. Feel free to swap this out if you like, but I wanted to include it for thematic reasons. Anyway, this is also kind of a tutorial on just here's all the ways you can get bleed consistently. Next up, the Caustic Band. This is a completely free slot, but getting just a flat 2 acid damage on all of our attacks is pretty nice. But again, you can swap this out for anything if you want. But I almost kind of wanted to flavor this as like it being like for kind of blood damage, because again, a lot of the Bloodborne weapons, including in Maria's boss fight, she coats her weapon with blood to deal more damage. So if we kind of flavor like burning hot blood as like acid, this kind of makes sense. But again, this is a free slot. Throw whatever you like in here. And finally, after Death Do Us Part. Did I mention this build has a phase 4? When the wearer is downed, they rise once more with half of their hit points restored but are gripped by Shadow Possession. Shadow Possession drives you mad, meaning that you'll attack anyone who's nearby regardless of their alignment to you, but all of your weapon attacks will deal an additional 1 to 4 necrotic damage. I believe this is the same as the curse that is inflicted if you stay in the darkness for too long in Act 2. So overall, like, even now, if the enemy gets through your first phase, which is your regular fighting, then your second phase, which is your tanky, bulky barbarian form that's throwing bleed everywhere, then they get you down to your third phase, which is the Slayer, then they somehow take that out, they suddenly have to deal with you rising up again once more, and fighting with 50% of your HP in like a last-ditch effort. You are going to feel like a boss fight when you play this build. In fact, actually, if you're able to kind of cure yourself of the Shadow Possession after you go down, you can even go into the Slayer form afterwards. But unfortunately, it is a curse. This isn't something that's just going to be done with a Wisdom save, unfortunately. So you are going to need to kind of be prepared for that. Maybe have a cleric in the party that can cure, that maybe can use Remove Curse on you if you really wanted to go down that route. But this is just like meant to be the, like, I can do this all day type thing, and I just think it's too perfect not to include on this build. So yeah, a 4-phase boss fight, and you're playing as it. It's too cool. Come on, you have to give me this one. You have to give it to me. It's too good. I love it so, so much. So, I just got done editing this video only to realise I never actually talked about the Slayer and how it synergizes with our build, so let's quickly go over it. First up, we do actually have some abilities that are related to bleeding, specifically multi-attack. Multi-attack allows you to do a lot of slashing damage, usually 1, 2, 3, 4d4 slashing damage, but there's an extra 4d6 slashing damage that is conditional. That condition is bleeding. Basically, if your target is bleeding, which we can either deal through features related to the Slayer, or from our own abilities in our base form, before we transform, we're going to be able to use this to deal an extreme amount of damage. As well as if the target is dazed, the attack is guaranteed to be a critical hit. The way we're able to get dazed is through, where is it? It's one of these. It is, where is it? Yes, let the slaughter begin. Basically, you brand nearby creatures with a sinister mark so that their deaths make you harder to kill. Marked targets are dazed, and when they die, you gain a +1 bonus to armor class for 4 turns. As well as armor class, as well as dazed, makes it so enemies have disadvantage on wisdom saves, cannot take reactions, and lose their dexterity bonus from their armor class. So it's a massive debuff that will allow you to do even more damage from the bleeding that we gain either through other features of the Slayer or from our base build features as well. But the other way we could do bleeding with the Slayer is through Scrumptious Bloodbath. Scrumptious Bloodbath allows you to slash open a foe's vital arteries. They start bleeding, yay, and the ensuing gush continuously heals your wounds. So you're able to heal every turn against bleeding targets when you hit them with Scrumptious Bloodbath, which is pretty damn great. We also gain access to Slay. You go, girl. Anyways, this allows you to, if the target is bleeding, you can inflict them with Contagion Poison. As well as if the target is prone, it's guaranteed to be a critical hit, and you have ways of knocking your enemies prone as well. And if the target is bleeding and prone, the attack will be a critical hit, and the target will become possibly stricken with Flesh Rot, which means they have disadvantage on charisma checks and vulnerability to all damage. And the way you knock enemies prone is with the Relentless Lunge, basically doing a jumping attack at an enemy and forcibly knocking them prone. I do believe I've covered everything here, but basically the way the Slayer form synergizes with the bleeding abilities of our base class just makes our transformation into Phase 3 feel even stronger. So yeah, basically more bleeding abilities, a high amount of damage, and a ton of HP, basically filling up that boss HP bar all the way back to full. Right, that's all I have to say. Back to your regularly scheduled combat footage and other programming. But yeah, that is the build, and as you can see from the combat footage that we'll currently be playing, this build shreds, like actually shreds. It's incredibly hard to hit, at least for the encounters that I tested it in. And again, I tested it at the early levels as well. I tested it at level 4. Level 4 actually in particular felt quite good with the 1 level of Fighter and the 3 levels of Barbarian. Being able to get that extra tankiness early on, as well as being able to basically still get extra attack with the dual wielding felt really, really nice. And as such, you know, you kind of have that, like, you basically get kind of like Phase 2 of your boss fight pretty early on with that strategy as well. Then at level 6, we kind of had extra attack as well, which just made us a bit more consistent in combat. Then at level 8, we had access to a few more things. I had the dual wielder feat at that point, as well as a couple of more points in fighter for action surge in the battle and the maneuvers, which just felt really good to use. And then at level 12, I mean, it's what you see in front of you. It is really strong. You get to spread bleed everywhere, you get to deal massive amounts of damage. Oh, the psionic powers. I did include some psionic powers in this build just to give us a little bit more to work with. These aren't required for the build, and I won't stop the combat footage to go over them, so just kind of listen to what I have to say, I guess. Basically, Luck of the Far Realms was a really, really good one. It kind of gives you like a big boss blast attack, which just does maximum damage. I would say the other ones that I have here are Force Tunnel, allowing you to kind of dash forward and push enemies away from you. That can feel quite powerful. Repulsor as well, being able to blast enemies with force and get them to knock away from you. Again, in the Lady Maria's kind of phase transition, where she like kind of stabs herself. If you're too close, you will get blasted back and take damage, so it feels quite thematic. As well as Psionic Overload as well, allowing you to kind of get a sort of Phase 2.5, where if you activate Psionic Overload, you're going to be able to add psychic damage to all of your attacks as well, at the cost of taking a little bit of psychic damage every turn. So if you wanted to activate that maybe early on in the fight, or maybe again once you reach that Phase 2 to kind of feel like you're powering up even more, then yeah, you could absolutely go for that. Might be a bit overkill, but hey, this whole build is overkill at this point. As well as you can also get some of the extra bonus ones, like Culver Week is another good one that I kind of recommend that was on this build. But that's pretty much all the ones I would say I would absolutely recommend. The rest are kind of neither here nor there. Going for Partial Illithid with this build too could actually visually represent the kind of slow descent into the like madness, like you see like the old blood coming up through their veins maybe. Like the Illithid Tadpole could also represent the kind of spread of the disease within you, as well as the Dark Urge stuff. So overall, I think it's really, really fun. I think overall kind of going for this mix of like, you know, kind of like some of the Bloodborne bosses mixed with like the player character really created this interesting build that works great mechanically, thematically, and it just looks awesome to play. I absolutely loved making this. Again, might have gone a bit overkill on some of the bleed stuff. If you feel like you're getting off bleed consistently, I should say, with one method over the other, probably once you're dual wielding the slicing sword, you probably don't need as long as you keep using Reckless Attack, which of course does have a risk. It's reckless for a reason. Of course, using Reckless Attack does come with the risk of having enemies also have advantage against you, so the other methods do kind of make sense to get, but if you feel like you're just using Reckless Attack all the time anyway, it's not really going to matter. You could probably switch out the Amulet of Ball. Again, you could change your Bestial Heart to something else. It's entirely up to you, but overall, I think this build is extremely solid, and I highly recommend you give it a try. It's one of those builds that I've made that, like, while it obviously feels great once you've kind of hit the higher levels, it feels good to play throughout the level progression, and I genuinely think this build will work great from start to finish, and because it synergizes so nicely with the mechanics that work in game, playing for Dark Urge, getting the Slayer stuff, and getting the psionic powers as well, like, it's going to feel great to play thematically, roleplay-wise, mechanically. It's all going to feel great to play as you go through the game. I highly, highly recommend this build. It's honestly one of my favorites. It does everything well, at least in my opinion. So there you go. My Lady Maria Bloodborne Hunter build that I've been trying to do forever is finally here, and I'm super, super happy with it. Right, that is going to be all from me. I don't think there's much else to talk about here. I mean, I've kind of gone over everything with the build, so yeah. Hopefully the combat footage is played out long enough that you actually get to see kind of all three phases. Maybe I should keep talking. What can I talk about? I don't know how many of you watch football, but England's doing quite well right now in the Euros. How many of you all have actually played Bloodborne? Because Bloodborne is, in my opinion, one of FromSoft's kind of best works. I know some people find the setting to be like, oh, you know, blood, nightmare, it's all, like, very edgy and, like, stuff, but, I mean, I'm a sucker for, like, gothic stuff. I mean, hell, I'm a Call of Cthulhu player, cut me some slack. All of this, like, gothic horror and, like, Lovecraft-inspired stuff is totally my vibe. Not to mention that it just has guns. Like I say, I forgot to use the dual crossbows here, but absolutely pick those up. They fit perfectly with this build. Or the Darkfire shortbow if you want haste. Not that you can use it, really, when you rage, but, you know, it's whatever. But, you know, you have a ton of options there. But, like, yeah, being able to use guns and such like that as well is really, really cool. The trick weapon system is amazing. If you have any way, if you're on PlayStation and you have a way of playing Bloodborne, please try it. You're going to have to get over the fact that even on, like, PlayStation 5, it's locked at 30 FPS, which does kind of suck, but I think it's tied to, like, iframes and game mechanics. But as long as you can look past the 30 FPS, honestly, you're playing one of the best games ever made. I'm just straight up, like, you will love it. It's hard. FromSoft games, Souls-like games. It is hard, but it's worth it. It is absolutely worth it to push through, and I really, really think you'll enjoy it if you ever give it a try. Right, that's got to be enough time for the combat footage to at least reach Phase 3, so I'm going to end it here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.